The Great Houses of Westeros, like their name suggests, are the most powerful houses in all of the Seven Kingdoms, and likely the most well-known houses by both fans of the books and the wider TV audience. We're talking about the big names, such as the Lannisters and the Starks. In most cases, by the time in the main books, the Great Houses of Westeros are mostly made up of houses appointed wardens of their particular kingdom by Aegon the Conqueror, with most of these appointed former kings of those kingdoms. Prior to Robert's Rebellion, the Great Houses consisted of House Stark, House Lannister, House Arryn, House Tully, House Tyrell, House Martell, House Baratheon, and House Greyjoy. Some would also count House Targaryen in that list, but they were the ruling monarch of Westeros, so I'm not sure if that really counts. Now, due to the size and importance of these houses, they of course place centre stage in the story of A Song of Ice and Fire and the wider history and lore. But each kingdom of Westeros has dozens of other houses with rich and storied histories. Some houses that arguably are larger or have just as much power as the kingdom's great house. Even houses that at some stage may have been considered part of the great houses before their downfall. In this video, we're going to take a look at each of the kingdoms of Westeros and pick a house that I believe would be next in line to be a great house. Well, it turned out a couple of kingdoms on that list were easier said than done. The vast and frigid realm of the Kings of Winter, the Starks of Winterfell, is generally considered the first and oldest of the Seven Kingdoms, in that it has endured, unconquered, for the longest. The vagaries of its geography and history set the north apart from their southern neighbours, the writings of Maester Yandel, the world of Ice and Fire, the north. Since Aegon's conquest, most of the kingdoms have been very politically stable, whereas prior, houses rose and fell from power quite frequently, with some kingdoms even being split into several petty kingdoms. The Riverlands and the Iron Islands are perfect examples of this. On the other hand, there were kingdoms where one or two houses have always been in consistent power in the region. This very much applies to the north, which for the most part has had House Stark as the main power in the kingdom. Even in circumstances where other houses rose up to a similar level of influence back in the days of the petty kingdoms, House Stark was very much in the conversation. When King Torrhen Stark bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror and rose the Warden of the North, House Stark was of course the undisputed choice, being without question a great house. So if we remove House Stark, who is it that's realistically going to take their place among the great houses? I think there are two very clear choices. The most obvious from a main book series point of view would of course be House Bolton. Not just because this is in fact how it's played out post-War of the Five Kings in the books, with the Boltons supplanting the Starks, but just because it practically makes sense. For a long time, House Bolton were kings in the north in their own right, when the north was not a unified kingdom, and during this time they were bitter rivals of House Stark, fighting many bloody wars with them over thousands of years. The Boltons achieved some success against the Starks, with Kings Royce II and Royce IV burning Winterfell, and according to some rumours, Boltons wore flayed skins of Stark princes and lords, such as the son of Bale the Bard, as a cloak during the Age of Heroes. The last Red King, Rogar the Huntsman, submitted to Winterfell when the coming of the Andals to Westeros was beginning. King Theon Stark the Hungry Wolf and the Boltons then defeated Argos Sevenstar and his Andals in the Battle of the Weeping Water. So given their history and power, House Bolton are the obvious second house in the north. But I would argue there is another house that could rival the Boltons, House Manderly. House Manderly's position in the north is very interesting. They are one of the bigger, more powerful houses, and as we've seen during A Dance with Dragons, they seem to be playing at the political game and resisting House Bolton's rise above House Stark, with the Manderlys being very loyal bannermen to the Starks, since they granted them refuge after they were expelled from the Reach thousands of years ago. More importantly, House Manderly controls White Harbour, the only true city in the north, and the only location with a real sizable population. It's not just a key trading hub into the Narrow Sea, but vital for getting supplies in and out of the north, such as food from the Reach. Having control over White Harbour has not only made the Manderlys very rich, but also very politically important and powerful. If House Stark were to suddenly blink out of existence, along with House Bolton, they would be the two great powers in the north. The only issue with House Manderly, however, is they are not traditionally northern. After settling in the north, they very much kept their own culture and customs from the Reach, and thus Andal customs. They worship the Seven, for instance, and have a much more heavy focus on things such as knighthood than most other northern houses. For all intents and purpose, House Manderly are a southern house in the north. While House Bolton might not be the first pick for a lot of northern houses to follow, they would culturally have a lot more in common with them. The real question is just how much of an impact these issues would have. It stretched before them to the misty east, a tranquil land of rich black soil, wide, slow-moving rivers, and hundreds of small lakes that shone like mirrors in the sun, protected on all sides by its sheltering peaks. The thoughts of Catelyn Stark on the Vale, A Game of Thrones Chapter 34, Catelyn 6. The Vale is actually one of the more straightforward choices when it comes to figuring out a second great house, because most of the houses in the Vale are on the smaller side, with one or two larger ones. Historically, House Arryn have had a firm grip on their position as Lords of the Vale, and before that, Kings of the Vale, for thousands of years, dating all the way back to the first Arryn king, Artist Arryn, whom was part of the initial Andal invasion thousands of years ago, when he defeated the first main kings of the Vale of House Royce. Yes, like the other kings of Westeros, they gave up their kingship during Aegon's conquest, but like the other great houses, they still had much influence and political power. Now, if you were to name a new great house in the Vale, like the North, there is one standout pick and a handful of interesting other options. Before the rise of House Arryn, House Royce were known as the Bronze Kings for centuries. Wearing their runic crown, the Royces of Runestone were the most powerful First Men monarchs of the Vale. After King Yorick VI Royce defeated the Shetts in several battles, King Osgood III Shett allied himself with Sir Gerald Grafton, an Andal warlord from Andalos across the Narrow Sea. Although they did defeat the Bronze King, the death of Osgood in battle led House Grafton to claim Goldtown for themselves. Yorick later repelled several other Andal attacks later and consolidated his own kingdom. The last of the Bronze Kings was Yorick's young grandson, Robar II Royce, who gained the allegiances of the surviving First Men houses during the Andal invasion, including the Belmores, Coldwaters, Hunters, Redfords and Upcliffs, and was proclaimed High King of the Vale, the Fingers and the Mountains of the Moon. Robar led the First Men to several victories, but he was eventually defeated by Artist Arryn and the Andals in the Battle of the Seven Stars, with the surviving Royces bending the knee and swearing fealty to House Arryn, the new kings of the Mountain and the Vale. The Royces are likely the second most powerful house in the Vale, and still have the support of many of the First Men houses. They were very much kings in their own right, just like House Arryn. Other than House Royce, you could make a case of House Grafton. Much like the Manderlys in the north, they controlled the only large population centre in the Vale, the port city of Goldtown. The Vale isn't as reliant on Goldtown as the north is with White Harbour, but it's still a vital part of the economy and supply chain of the Vale. You could make a very flimsy case for House Harding, given Robin Arryn's presumed heir comes from that house, Harold Harding, his cousin. But House Harding is a very minor house of landed knights, and not even lords in their own right, which kind of puts a dampener on the idea of them replacing House Arryn as a great house in the Vale. I also suspect if Harold Harding did become Lord of the Vale, he would do so under the Arryn name. On balance, House Royce does seem most fitting in terms of the size of the house, but also its deep and storied history and connection to the ancient days of the Vale. The Westerlands are a place of rugged hills and rolling plains, of misty dales and craggy shorelines, a place of blue lakes and sparkling rivers and fertile fields, or broadleaf forests that teem with game of every sort, where half-hidden doors in the sides of wooden hills open onto labyrinth caves that wend their way through darkness to reveal unimaginable wonders and vast treasures deep beneath the earth. The writings of Maester Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the Westerlands. House Lannister has ruled the Westerlands in some capacity as Lords or Kings of the Rock, dating back before the Long Night into the Age of Heroes, when Lann the Clever stole Casterly Rock from the Casterlys. While the amount of power they have held has grown and then shrunk again over the long history of Westeros, their position as the rulers of the Westerlands and thus a great house, has never really been questioned or strongly tested. They have the history, the manpower, they have the political might, and they have the gold to keep them in this position of power. House Lannister truly eclipses even the largest and most powerful of their bannermen. Thus, choosing whom could replace them as a great house if the Lannisters cease to exist is a tricky matter. As we've discussed, over thousands of years, there were periods where House Lannister's power waxed and waned. The last time this seemed to have happened occurred under the rule of Tytos Lannister, the father of Tywin Lannister. Tytos was described as an amiable and jovial gentleman, known as the Laughing Lion, prior to the death of his beloved wife Jane Marbrand. However, he was also weak-willed, eager to please, slow to anger, quick to forgive, and too trusting by half. He saw the good in everyone, great and small, but this trust blinded him to the threats House Lannister faced, this blindness leading to the Reyne revolt, an uprising in the Westerlands in 261 AC. House Reyne and House Tarbeck renounced fealty and rose against their Lannister overlords due to the perceived weaknesses of the Lord of Casterly Rock and growing power of House Reyne. The revolt was crushed by Tytos' young heir, Sir Tywin Lannister, whom in turn would make House Lannister a feared and respected house among the other great houses of Westeros, and to some extent the Iron Throne itself. House Reyne, thanks to their gold mines like House Lannister, had become extremely rich and over decades had found many allies that had them believing they could supplant House Lannister and its current weak leadership. They just didn't account for Tywin being a very different man from his father. So if House Reyne was not destroyed by Tywin Lannister, I would say you could make an argument for them being the second house in the Westerlands. But every Reyne drowned inside Castamere, and the house now nothing but a bard's song and a warning to any would-be rebel. When you then look at the other houses that make up the Westerlands, while there are many with really cool and interesting histories, and some with famed lords and knights, such as the Westerlings and the Farmans, maybe even House Plum with their Targaryen bloods, but there is no standout choice. I suspect what would happen if its control of the Westerlands would pass to House Lannister of Lannisport, a cadet branch of House Lannister of Casterly Rock. Think of them as cousins to the main line. They of course control Lannisport, the main port and city in the Westerlands, and they are also closely related to the main Lannister line. While this might seem a bit of a cop-out, to me it's the only answer that really makes any practical or realistic sense. You need to come south. You need a taste of summer before it flees. In Highgarden, there are fields of golden roses that stretch away as far as the eye can see. The fruits are so ripe they explode in your mouth. Melons, peaches, fire plums. You've never tasted such sweetness. Robert Baratheon to Eddard Stark, On the Reach. A Game of Thrones Chapter 4, Eddard 1. The idea of a second house that could become a great house in the absence of House Tyrell is a really compelling issue. Because frankly, given their history and power, it does seem strange it's not House Hightower. The House Hightower are not considered among the great houses, and are not Lords of the Reach. In fact, something that's been debated in the fan community for years is why Aegon the Conqueror rose House Tyrell to Lords of Highgarden and Lords Paramount of the Mander in the wake of the conquest over House Hightower, who seem a much better fit. Some fans have compared it to Aegon making a house like the Umbers or the Mormonts, Wardens of the North, over House Stark. The thing is, this is a complex topic, and one I am going to make a video about in much more detail. But the short version is that prior to Aegon's conquest and the downfall of the Gardener Kings of the Reach, House Tyrell were their stewards for thousands of years. It's not exactly clear what a steward does, but it kind of seems they almost act as a hand of the king-like role, where they would assist the king in the ruling of the realm and often act as regents when necessary, or rule in the king's place when he is absent. While they are an Andal house, being founded by an Andal knight, through several marriages with House Gardener, they can trace descent back to the legendary first kings of the Reach. It's unclear if House Tyrell were just a knightly house, or lords, prior to becoming Lords Paramount of the Mander, since they were given their own title of High Steward. When people speak in favour of why Aegon chose the Tyrells over the Hightowers, it's the fact they had been the right hand of the Gardeners for thousands of years, and on several occasions ruled the Reach as regents for them. While they had never been kings in their own right, they had thousands of years of experience administering the Reach and making sure the kingdom was running smoothly and was prosperous. They likely knew the Reach in its entirety better than the Hightowers, who very much were Oldtown-centric. In House Tyrell, Aegon likely saw continuity and a stable pair of hands who knew how to rule the Reach as a whole kingdom from closely working with the Gardeners as regents several times. Also, given how many marriages there seem to be between House Tyrell and House Gardener, they are effectively very close kin. Then we have House Hightower. The family is ancient, one of the oldest in Westeros, existing since before the Dawn days, when there were thousands of petty kingdoms. While most scholars believe they descended from the First Men, there are some arguments they could perhaps even predate them. They were kings in their own right, only becoming vassals of House Gardener via marriage sometime prior to the coming of the Andals. The house has only grown richer and more powerful since then. They control Oldtown, which is the largest city in Westeros, and thus its vital port as well. After the Andal invasion, Oldtown became the home of the Faith of the Seven, with the Starry Sept, with many men and women of House Hightower joining the faith as Septons and Septors, with several High Septons coming from House Hightower as a result. There have been many cases where the Lord of the Hightower has gone to the High Septon for advice, and vice versa. Oldtown is also the location of the Citadel, the home of the Maesters, again with many members of House Hightower becoming Maesters, with many too becoming Archmaesters. That close relationship between House Hightower, the Faith and the Citadel is extremely powerful, given how fundamentally intertwined both the Faith and the Maesters are into the very culture and political fabric of Westeros. House Hightower are also extremely rich. So rich in fact, we know at some point after the Lycene Spring, they operated their own bank. We don't know if this bank still exists today, but the fact they could even manage that is fascinating. So yeah, House Hightower are the obvious pick as a house who could replace House Tyrell as the Lords of the Reach. They have the history, the wealth, the political power needed. So if they fit the role so well, why were they not chosen by Aegon to rule the Reach after the conquest? While we know House Tyrell were never kings in their own right, they of course had thousands of years of experience running the Reach as a whole, and were close kin to the Gardeners. Then when you look at House Hightower and consider their control of Oldtown, relationship with the Faith and Citadel, making them Lord Paramount to the Mander on top of that, might have just made them just a little bit too powerful, even for a man like Aegon the Conqueror to feel comfortable with. Ironborn captains were proud and willful, and did not go in awe of a man's blood. The islands were too small for awe, and the longships smaller still. If every captain was a king aboard his own ship, as was often said, it was a small wonder they named the islands the land of 10,000 kings. The Thoughts of Theon Greyjoy, A Clash of Kings Chapter 11, Theon 1. The Iron Islands is a hard kingdom to determine in terms of a second house who could challenge the Greyjoys as a great house, due to the very nature of the Iron Islands being quite politically unstable, due to the fact that kingship worked very differently in the Isles than anywhere else in Westeros, thanks to the concept of a Kingsmoot to elect High Kings, and also the concept of Salt Kings and Rock Kings. There were of course houses who held on to power for long periods of time, such as the Grey Iron Kings, and of course House Hoare, who not only became kings of the Iron Islands, but most of the Riverlands as well. While things have been stable under House Greyjoy for the most part, since they were made lords of the Isles by Aegon the Conqueror, even then there were of course houses who had more kings of the Isles than the Greyjoys, such as House Goodbrother, which is why I think I would put House Goodbrother in with a reasonable claim to become the second house. There are then other ancient powerful families such as House Drum and House Awkward. As things stand in the main books with House Greyjoy's current position, I actually think House Harlaw might also be a good choice, given Balon Greyjoy was married to a Lannis Harlaw, and thus both Theon and Asha have Harlaw connections, with Asha deeply leveraging that Harlaw part of her. They control the island of Harlaw, but also have a sizable amount of vassal houses loyal to them. Roderick Harlaw also seems like a competent leader from what we have seen, as well as members of the house being quite numerous thanks to the sheer number of cadet branches they have. I suspect in a situation where House Greyjoy disappeared, there would be a period of chaos in the Isles until something like a Kingsmoot was called, The houses of the Isles choose among themselves. If truth be told, in this situation, any house could come out on top. Memories of ancient wrongs and bygone betrayals were not oft put aside by the Lords of the Trident, whose enmities ran as deep as the rivers that watered their lands. The writings of Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the Riverlands. House Tully in the Riverlands is another house who we have actually technically seen them be deposed as Lords of the Riverlands in the main books as a result of the outcome of the War of the Five Kings. House Tully had been the Lords of the Riverlands since Aegon's conquest and the downfall of Harren the Black. Unlike most of the other great houses, save for the Tyrells, they had never been kings in their history. Lord Edmund Tully was one of the first River Lords to answer Aegon's call for support, rising up against Harren the Black. So respected was Edmund, and so despised Harren, several other notable river lords also joined with Aegon. It made sense given Edmund's loyalty, as well as the powerful position of Riverrun, that Aegon would name House Tully Lords Paramount of the Trident. Now, a huge factor a lot of people misremember from the main books is that House Frey, while they were granted the former Tully seat of Riverrun, forming the new cadet branch House Freya Riverrun with Aemon Frey as its lord, they were not made Lord Paramount. That honour was in fact given to House Baelish, whom in theory would consist of Peter Baelish, ruling from his new seat of Harrenhal. The issue here is, I doubt House Baelish will be around long enough to have any real meaningful impact on the Riverlands, and while backed by the Crown's current hold on power is tenuous at best. It's very likely House Tully will eventually be restored to power, with both House Baelish and Frey greatly diminished, if not outright destroyed. But if we do turn the clocks back prior to the War of the Five Kings, if House Tully were to vanish overnight, who could be raised up as Lord Paramount and become a great house? House Frey certainly has the wealth and the power the twins has given them. They are also a very large house, thanks to Walder Frey's many children. But the Freys are not well liked or respected by the other Riverlords, especially during the lordship of Walder Frey, whom is greatly despised by many, even beyond the Riverlands. Thus there would be a lot of pushback from the other houses, I suspect. House Blackwood and House Bracken both have long and storied histories, and both have been river kings at various stages during the eras of the petty kingdoms, especially prior to the coming of the Andals. But the rivalry and division between the Brackens and the Blackwoods, and thus the division this would cause in the Riverlands as a whole, does not make them the unifying figure a Lord Paramount needs to be. My pick would actually be House Mouton. They were kings during the Age of Heroes, and have many legends and tales dating back to this era, such as Florian the Fool and Jonquil. They also control Maidenpool, one of the largest towns in Westeros and one of the largest population centres in the Riverlands, with it also being a minor key port in the Bay of Crabs. So it really depends on when we are proposing raising this new great house. Prior to the War of the Five Kings, I do think House Mouton is the safest bet. Post-war, however, it's impossible to say with so much currently in flux. But I would suspect House Tully might regain their status as Lord Paramount by story's end. Today, the writ of House Baratheon runs to the south bank of the Wendwater and lower reaches of the Kingswood, and along the stony shore of the narrow sea up to the base of Massey's Hook. But before Aegon's conquest, before the coming of the Andals, the warrior kings of House Durrandon pushed their borders considerably further, the writings of Maester Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the Stormlands. Historically, the Stormlands is one of the most politically stable kingdoms in Westeros in comparison with the others. Since the Age of Heroes, it's been under the control of the Storm Kings of House Durrandon, with them seemingly never really being deposed. They fought many wars with the kings of House Gardner and the petty kingdoms to the north in what would become the Crownlands. But by the time of Aegon's conquest, King Argilac has found himself pressed on both sides by the Gardners and Harren the Black, with Argilac's heir being his only daughter Argella. It was a treacherous time for the house. But for a single house to remain so stable over such a long period of time shows us the strength of House Durrandon. Even though the house went extinct during Aegon's conquest, after the death of Argilac Durrandon in the Battle of the Last Storm, with Orys Baratheon named Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, he not only took the crown, stag banner and words of the old Storm King as his own, but also his daughter Argella to wife. So while House Durrandon fell, their legacy continued via the new House Baratheon. Under House Targaryen, things remained relatively stable in the Stormlands, with House Baratheon never really being pushed or tested by their vassals. That's why the Stormlands is one of the most politically stable kingdoms in Westeros. That is until Robert's Rebellion, and the house split into 3 branches: King's Landing, Storm's End, and Dragonstone. That stability is no longer as apparent. What is interesting is most of the Stormlords do initially back Renly Baratheon during the War of the Five Kings, until he is assassinated, which might be a testament to the loyalty the Stormlanders have to the Lord of Storm's End. Come the end of A Dance with Dragons, Storm's End, and thus House Baratheon of Dragonstone and Storm's End, are under the control of Stannis Baratheon, but it does seem like Storm's End will fall to Jon Connington and Aegon, with Dragonstone 2 looking like it will fall to House Baratheon of King's Landing and House Lannister. When you look at the list of houses that make up the Stormlands, it's really hard to choose one that could replace House Baratheon, as none of them are particularly huge houses. You had the likes of the Estemonts, who were powerful. House Connington once have been a popular choice, but the house has fallen from grace dramatically since Robert's Rebellion. But who knows, maybe Jon Connington might change that. But if I had to pick a safe bet, I would actually choose House Tarth. They are one of the larger houses of the Stormlands, and also one of the most politically stable. At one stage, they did rule Tarth as kings in their own right. Another way you could look at the situation is, rather than naming a new house Lords of the Stormlands, you could raise up one of Robert Baratheon's numerous bastards, with the most likely choice being Edric Storm, given he is of noble descent from both parents, with his mother being a Florent, and with Edric being recognised by Robert as his son, which few of his other bastards were. He also grew up at Storm's End under the care of his uncle Renly, but if you had to pick a completely different house, I think I would take a punt with House Tarth, though it really could be one of several houses. Dorne had seemed a queer place to him as well when he first came here with his own princess many years ago. The bearded priests had drilled him on the common speech of Westeros before they sent him forth, but the Dornishmen all spoke too quickly for him to understand. Dornish women were lewd, Dornish wine was sour, and Dornish food was full of queer, hot spices. And the Dornish sun was hotter than the pale sun of Norvos, glaring down from the blue sky day after day. The thoughts of Areo Hotah. A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 38. The Watcher. The current great house and rulers of Dorne are House Martell, who have been the prince and princesses of Dorne for thousands of years, since the many petty kingdoms of Dorne were unified after the coming of the Rhoynar and the marriage of Mors Martell to the Rhoynish leader Nymeria. Up until that point, there were still several small kingdoms in Dorne, but there were only a handful of houses who claimed the title of High King of Dorne. Even then, these High Kings were never in control of the whole of Dorne. The largest and most powerful of these High Kings was House Yronwood. Not only was their kingdom expansive, during the Unification War of Dorne, House Yronwood held out against House Martell for the longest. Even after House Martell came to power, House Yronwood had remained one of their most powerful and influential bannermen. Thus, given all of this, House Yronwood are a natural fit when it comes to the idea of them becoming a great house in the event House Martell were removed. House Dane might also be an interesting pick. They too were kings in their own right and widely respected, not just in Dorne, but by lots of other houses in the kingdoms to the north. They also have a reputation for producing feared and talented warriors, the Swords of the Morning, who wield the house's legendary ancestral blade, Dorne. Men such as the famed Arthur Dane. While not as clear of a pick as House Yronwood, the Danes of Starfall would still be a good choice. The Crownlands presents us with an interesting dilemma when picking a new great house. The Crownlands is the newest of the kingdoms of Westeros, created as the personal holdings of House Targaryen after Aegon's conquest. While House Targaryen were the kings of Westeros, they only directly controlled and administered this new area called the Crownlands, hence the name, leaving the running of the other kingdoms to their lord paramounts. Thus, in theory, the great house in control of the Crownlands are the kings of Westeros themselves. So, in this case, it would be House Targaryen until their downfall in Robert's Rebellion, with then the new House Baratheon of King's Landing taking their place. So the answer to this question simply is whoever could end up taking the throne. But let's for instance say we were going to raise up another house as a great house in the Crownlands. What one makes the most sense? I think there is one clear answer. House Velaryon. Although they are well past their peak of their power by the time in the main books, thanks to the losses and damages of the Dance of the Dragons, there is no doubt they are large and historically important enough of a house, as well as having a huge impact in the lore. They once were near always the master of ships on Small Council, and still have a sizable fleet of their own. In fact, Stannis Baratheon's taking of the Stormlands and attack on King's Landing would have been a much harder task, if not impossible, without the ships of House Velaryon.